The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 631. Fit. Far from scared, Xavier suddenly burst into laughter. Smash the Lachlan family? He straightened up, looking at Kiran with pride, his traditional attire exuding an air of dominance. He pointed towards the expansive Lachlan family compound and said, "I don't know who you are, but I admire your courage. However, let me tell you, this is the Lachlan family. Never mind smashing the Lachlan family. Even if you touch a blade of grass here, you'll be leaving horizontally." The more Xavier spoke, the more arrogantly he seemed to become, his gaze contemptuously sweeping over the crowd. "Go saves and harms people! Who would believe such a thing? Stand up if you do!" Upon hearing Xavier's loud challenge, the crowd fell silent and dared not speak. They didn't know who Kiran was, but they knew when they were desperate and ill, the miraculous healing of the Lachlan family had allowed them to survive. Even with doubts, they couldn't risk their lives but had to rely on the Lachlan family. Seeing the crowd's reaction, Xavier became even more arrogant, his gaze turning coldly towards Kiran. "See? Your words are lies." "Kiran, let it be," whispered Esther and Zara, knowing the strong foundation of the Lachlan family among the people of Fox and worried about escalating the situation. Kiran ignored the crowd's reaction and walked towards Xavier. Seeing Kiran approach, Xavier sneered. "I really admire your courage. I truly do not know where such arrogance comes from." "That's admiration. You're a bit early," Kiran retorted, then quickly grabbed Xavier by his collar. Xavier remained unbothered, calmly looking at Kiran. "Touch me, and you die." "Do you think I will die?" Kiran questioned. With a swift motion, Kiran threw Xavier, who landed with a thud against the signboard reading "Miraculous Healing." Crash! The sound of the signboard breaking echoed. "Ouch!" Xavier cried out in pain. Thump! He hit the ground in an ungraceful manner. "Ah!" Xavier screamed, his pristine traditional outfit now covered in dust, mud, and blood. "Puffed!" Xavier spat out a mouthful of blood, lying on the ground, his body looking broken. Yet he still glared at Kiran fiercely, shouting, "You actually dared to strike? Stunned?" Kiran scoffed, approaching. Xavier, both angry and scared, said, "Kid, look at your hand. It's already poisoned with goo. You won't live. Is it?" Kiran placed his hand in front of Xavier. Xavier saw that Kiran's hand was perfectly normal, without any signs of poisoning, and was momentarily stunned. He thought he was mistaken, struggling to get up, staring at Kiran's hand. "Is it?" Kiran continued to shake his hand, mockingly asking, How are you not poisoned?" Xavier was incredulous. He knew he had used goo poison. "Go ask someone who knows!" Kiran slapped Xavier, sending him flying to the door. Esther and Zara trembled as if they had seen a monster. In their eyes, Kiran had indeed become a monster. Even though they admired and worshipped Kiran, they were shocked by his boldness and arrogance. This was the Lachlan family. Even though they were unsure of the opponent's strength, they knew their parents wouldn't dare to offend the Lachlan family. In Fox City, the Lachlan family's status in people's hearts was subtly elevated above even the largest family, the Sutton family. Were it not for Gordon Sutton serving as the city mayor, the Lachlan family might well be recognized as the top family. Kiran had just caused a scene, hitting someone and smashing a signboard. Was he trying to stir up a hornet's nest? How could they possibly help Ruby Lachlan now? Who did this? A muffled, icy voice came from inside, and a slender, pale man with a gloomy face stepped out. "That's Matthew Lachlan, Ruby Lachlan's father," Esther hurriedly whispered to Kiran. Kiran's gaze swept over Matthew Lachlan. Kiran's face was pale because he had been fighting the goo poison administered by Xavier just now. Matthew Lachlan's gaze, following everyone else's, locked onto Kiran. "You dare cause trouble here? Did you see me causing trouble?" Kiran scoffed as if looking at a fool. "You." Matthew hadn't expected such audacity. Bang! Kiran's hand suddenly shot up, and with a remote palm strike towards the pharmacy, a powerful force tore through the air like a tornado. The pharmacy came crashing down. Ah! The people in the pharmacy screamed and ran away. "Do you see it now?" Kiran stared at the furious Matthew and asked coldly. Matthew was so angry he could burst. He hadn't expected Kiran to be so bold. Seeking death. With a whoosh, Matthew leaped towards Kiran. Kiran's eyes narrowed, noticing a red scorpion crawling inside Matthew's sleeve during his leap. No one else saw it because Matthew was so quick. Kiran smirked coldly, not dodging but instead stepping forward to meet him. "Clueless!" Matthew shouted, thinking Kiran was unaware of his goo. "Be careful!" Esther and Zara screamed. "Big brother, poison him to death!" His brother, Xavier Lachlan, struggling to get up, shouted joyfully upon seeing this scene. "Next year, today will be your death anniversary," Matthew shouted at Kiran with dominance. Smack. "With just you." Kiran's hand shot up, striking Matthew across the face. Theft. Matthew's body flew through the air, spewing blood, his head spinning as he fell like a kite with its string cut. The onlookers were as if they had seen a monster. The most shocked was Xavier. His brother's goo hadn't even been deployed. How could this be? Their goo poison was formidable, capable of killing invisibly. Matthew's full-force attack was meant to kill Kiran, but where was the goo poison? Matthew tried to get up but fell to the ground, his face hitting the dirt, becoming a bloody mess. "Anybody else in the Lachlan family who isn't worthless?" Kiran called out defiantly as he looked around. Chapter 632. Kiran's question, "Are there any who are not useless?" deeply wounded Matthew and Xavier. As direct descendants and core forces of the Lachlan family, well-versed in their unique magic, they were no match for Kiran, leaving everyone wondering about his true identity. The other Lachlan family members gathered were filled with shock and fear. Enough of this racket. What's going on here? At that moment, a commanding voice echoed from within. A tall, elderly man with white hair emerged, followed by 4 similarly aged, formidable men. With hands clasped behind his back and an imposing aura, this man was Ruby Lachlan's grandfather, Hugh Lachlan. Kiran slightly nodded in acknowledgement. His dramatic entrance had summoned the family's decision-maker. "Father, this young man smashed our pharmacy and assaulted us," Xavier spoke, his voice trembling due to his injuries. Hugh's expression darkened further upon seeing the shattered, miraculous healing sign, as if a great fortune had been lost, his eyes blazing with fury at Kiran. "Young man, aren't you being too arrogant?" "Arrogant?" Kiran responded lightly, undeterred. Surprised by Kiran's calm demeanor, Hugh pressed, "You come into our home to destroy and fight. Is that not arrogance?" Kiran shook his head. "This isn't arrogance. It's justice." "Justice?" Hugh sneered, his anger rising. Kiran affirmed, "Yes, justice." He pointed at the patients. "The Lachlan family knows exactly how they make their money." "Father, he's falsely accusing us of using magic for healing and poisoning," Xavier protested. Hugh's face remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed his shock at Kiran's knowledge. Attempting to dismiss Kiran's claims, he said, "Youthful indiscretion is understandable, but you should be careful with your words." Turning to the patients, Hugh asked, "Do you believe in our family's medical skills?" The patients, having witnessed Kiran's demonstration, were torn. Accusing the Lachlan family could mean alienating themselves from future care. "Of course we believe," a familiar voice suddenly interjected. Kiran spun around and saw Lucia, supported by Archie and Bianca. Observing Lucia's condition, Kiran realized her spinal issue hadn't fully healed, leading to incontinence. "Kiran is here," Archie called out joyously. "Uncle Campbell," Kiran greeted warmly. "Don't call him Uncle Campbell. Our family doesn't acknowledge you," Lucia rebuked sharply, then turned to Hugh with a sickening, fawning smile. "The Lachlan family's medical skills are unmatched in Fawkes, no, in the entire nation. We wholeheartedly believe in you." Lucia's act, seeking approval from the others, quickly swayed the undecided crowd. They nodded, agreeing, "Yes, the Lachlan family's medical expertise is unparalleled. Kiran's medical skills are just as impressive. If it weren't for Kiran, I would be dead by now," Archie Campbell spoke up, indignant. "Shut up, Kiran is a fraud," Lucia interrupted fiercely. Seeing her parents argue with Kiran, Bianca felt a surge of anger and disdain for Kiran, confronting him. "Why are you like a bad penny? Always showing up where you're least wanted?" Kiran thought, was this mother and daughter duo sent by the heavens to torment him? Why must he always cross paths with them? Not hearing Kiran's reply and assuming he felt guilty and ashamed, Bianca spoke more arrogantly. "I don't want to see you now. Leave immediately." "Get out," Lucia joined in the rebuke. "How can you speak to Kiran like that?" Archie couldn't contain his anger towards his wife and daughter. "Shut up," Lucia retorted fiercely. She was now seeking their medical skills, so she needed to appease them. She turned to Hugh. "This is an uneducated wild child. Don't mind him." Then, turning to Kiran with disgust, she spat out, "Like a bad omen." Kiran, feeling the deep sting of their repeated insults, particularly the term wild child, began to get angry. Sensing Kiran's growing irritation, Archie warned Lucia, "If you keep speaking to Kiran like that, be careful, or I'll get angry." "What can you do even if you're angry? If you like him that much, why don't you just go and live with him?" Lucia replied coldly. "You." Archie was left speechless and white with rage. Seeing Archie's sincerity, Kiran managed to suppress his anger and turned to Hugh. "Your patient is here. You're Fox City's #1. Oh no, the country's #1. Treat her. Puzzled by the dynamics within Archie's family, Hugh dismissed Kiran's challenge with a snort. Why should I bother to cure her? When Lucia heard that, she was instantly afraid. She scolded Kiran fiercely. Little bastard, what sins did I commit in my previous life to meet a jinx like you? Kiran, if my mother's condition doesn't improve, you'll never find peace in this lifetime. Bianca's anger was palpable, thinking about her mother's incontinence. Kiran ignored the strange mother-daughter pair and looked at Hugh. It's not that you don't want to cure, but you can't. Hugh's expression turned dark and cold. Are you suspecting me? Kiran shook his head. I'm not suspecting anything. I'm just telling the truth. Kiran's words poked the hornet's nest of patience, and they began to scold him. Kid, you dare to doubt Master Lachlan's medical skills. He has treated me for decades. Master Lachlan's medical skills are godlike. Hugh smiled proudly. Although he had not treated anyone in the past few years, his reputation was still very good. He smiled at everyone and said, Thank you for remembering my medical skills. The family head of the Lachlan family is the miracle doctor. Master Lachlan is my savior. Thank you for letting me live for so many years. Some people were so touched that they cried. Some people even knelt and kowtowed to thank him for his medical skills. Seeing this, Lucia was even more expectant. The head of the Lachlan family is the miracle doctor. That little bastard is just talking nonsense. Hugh looked smug as he looked at Kiran with a cold smile. Shall we bet? Kiran replied with a smile. What are we betting on? Hugh asked with a cold smile. Kiran pointed at Lucia. If you cure her illness, I'll admit defeat and kowtow to you to apologize. All right. Hugh was full of confidence. If I win, Ruby Lachlan will be mine, Kiran added. Chapter 633. Ruby belonging to Kiran? Hugh Lachlan's gaze sharpened and turned icy as he looked at Kiran, his eyes brimming with anger. Kiran, however, didn't seem perturbed and met Hugh's gaze directly. Do you know Ruby? Hugh asked in a deep voice. I came here specifically to find Ruby, Kiran replied without lying. Hugh's icy gaze then shifted towards Esther and Zara, his eyes filled with questions. The two women trembled and didn't dare to speak. They had seen Hugh before. Back then, to them, Hugh was a benevolent elder, not this person before them now, exuding a chilling murderous intent. You want my daughter? Dream on. Matthew, filled with hatred for the man who had just beaten him, expressed his disdain. Kiran, you have so many women around you, and yet you come to the Lachlan family to snatch more? You really have no shame, utterly oblivious to your impending doom. Bianca, upon hearing Kiran's intention for Ruby, couldn't contain her rising fury. Although she had never met Ruby in person, she had seen her photos circulated within their social circles. Ruby was considered the most beautiful woman in Fox. Bianca thought, if she herself looked down upon Kiran, on what basis did he think he could aspire to have Ruby? How exactly do you know Ruby? Hugh pressed, his voice laden with a mix of anger and curiosity. A pot of life and death love wine and a vow of love, Kiran responded simply. Kiran, so you've started playing the romantic now, have you? Bianca did not know what the life and death love wine was and scoffed at Kiran. Quiet! Hugh turned his fierce gaze on Bianca, rebuking her sharply. Bianca shivered in response. Lucia quickly pulled her daughter aside, signaling her to remain silent. Hugh's gaze remained intensely fixed on Kiran. The life and death liquor represented a solemn vow. Giving such a gift was akin to giving one's heart. Considering Ruby's recent aversion to her marriage arrangement, Hugh felt as if he had stumbled upon the answer. How did you come to drink her life and death liquor? He questioned, his tone cold. She gave it to me, Kiran answered straightforwardly. Matthew's face contorted with even more hatred, the implication being that Ruby had given her heart to Kiran. To Hugh, Kiran represented a threat that had to be eliminated, especially in light of Ruby's pending marriage arrangement. He was determined to treat Lucia Jensen, but the stakes were Kiran's life. Desperate for a cure, Lucia declared, Kiran, if my illness isn't cured because of you today, I swear we'll die together. The thought of spending her life in shame was unbearable to her. She kneeled before Hugh, begging for his mercy. Kiran could tell that Hugh was about to agree. Kiran's eyes flickered with anger as he looked at Hugh Lachlan. I'm no longer betting. If you want to cure her, then do it. After speaking, he stepped aside, distancing himself from the affair. Lucia, not understanding the intricacies, quickly got up and offered her arm to Hugh. Master Lachlan, could you take my pulse, please? Hugh, surprised that Kiran had withdrawn from the bet, quickly understood it was because of Lucia's harsh words towards him. Now he had to have Kiran's life, and direct murder was not the ideal choice. Betting seemed a good strategy. Angry at Lucia for disrupting his plan, he snapped, "Get lost!" Lucia, startled by Hugh's sudden outburst, shivered with fear, feeling a wet sensation between her legs, scared out of her wits. Desperate for a cure and disregarding her embarrassment, Lucia knelt down again before Hugh. "Master Lachlan, didn't you say you would cure me?" "Go away." Someone from Hugh's side stepped forward and kicked Lucia, sending her tumbling. Lucia screamed in pain. "How can you hit someone?" Bianca attempted to confront them but retreated when she met their furious glares. Archie helped Lucia up, coldly reminding her, "If it weren't for Kiran betting, Master Lachlan wouldn't have considered curing you." "What are you talking about?" Lucia demanded angrily, refusing to accept the truth. "If Kiran agrees to the bet, I will cure her," Hugh stated coldly. Lucia screamed in rage, her face a mask of anger and resentment. Bianca, infuriated, turned to Kiran. "What makes you think my mother owes you an apology?" Kiran looked at Archie. "Uncle Archie, there's no need for apologies." Archie nodded slightly, showing approval for Kiran's magnanimity. "I just want to clarify something with Aunt Lucia and Bianca today," Kiran said slowly. "What is it?" Lucia asked angrily. "You're just a toad lusting after swan meat. I will never marry you." Bianca haughtily adjusted her hair, exuding pride. Kiran internally laughed at her vanity. "Uncle Archie, from today onwards, we're just strangers." Kiran paused. "I, Kiran, on behalf of the York family, thank you." He turned to Lucia and Bianca. "The rise of the York family won't require your family's help." Kiran's calm demeanor belied his firm resolve, leaving Archie's family stunned. Archie showed a hint of disappointment, nodding at Kiran, understanding that Kiran was severing ties with the Campbell family. Lucia, on the other hand, was overjoyed, laughing. "You know your place," Bianca gloated. "Finally, I don't have to worry about you, the toad." She added arrogantly, "The man worthy of me would be like Lord of the Sea, not a loser like you." Hearing this, Kiran chuckled silently, aware that he was indeed Lord of the Sea. Hugh, pleased to hear Kiran's willingness to bet, eyed Kiran. "If I win, I don't want your apology. I want your life." Kiran's eyes met Hugh's, filled with a cold sneer. Hugh lacked any semblance of the benevolence expected from a healer. Such a person, Kiran pondered. How could he possibly possess any medical ethics? "This remnant of the York family, better off dead," Lucia said through gritted teeth, feeling vindicated. "Kiran, don't agree," Archie urgently warned him upon hearing the stakes were Kiran's life. Kiran responded with a calm expression. "Hugh Lachlan, I accept your terms." Chapter 634. Lucia's condition became a bet involving life and a woman, a concept even she hadn't anticipated. Yet within her, pride swelled, feeling a sense of honor despite the scolding and near apology to Kiran she had almost had to make. "Prepare for treatment," Hugh Lachlan ordered his servants, who promptly started arranging a medical bed and chair, setting up everything necessary for the treatment. "It's been many years since we've seen Master Lachlan treat and save someone," some patients remarked with envy in their eyes, considering Lucia fortunate to receive such personal care from him. Assisted by Archie and Bianca, Lucia lay on the medical bed, her pride soaring, oblivious to the fact that this treatment was wagered on Kiran's life, focusing only on her anticipated recovery. Hugh, with a serious expression, sat down, pretending to take Lucia's pulse. "There's no need to waste time. She was hit by a car, her spine is misaligned and pressing on nerves, leading to urinary incontinence and losing control of her bowels. There's nothing else wrong with her," Kiran intervened from the side. Hugh frowned slightly. Although he didn't appreciate Kiran's interruption, he respected his medical insight for identifying the issue at a glance. "Kiran, shut up. What do you know?" Lucia, unaware and fearful of any disturbance to her treatment, scolded angrily. "He's right," Hugh surprisingly affirmed. Lucia lay on the bed feeling upside down, her breathing labored with frustration. Kiran, it seemed, was her nightmare, seemingly omnipotent. Hugh began manipulating his goo, preparing to use it to realign Lucia's spine, a task not difficult for him. Kiran, seeing Hugh about to act, moved closer. "What are you doing?" Bianca yelled, attempting to stop him. Without a word, Kiran approached, his inner energy naturally carrying the influence of the love spell. Hugh, about to use his goo, felt it recoil at the presence of the love spell's energy, behaving as if a mouse was confronted by a cat, and suddenly froze. This sudden change startled Hugh, who couldn't understand why his goo refused to respond. He attempted to command them again, to no avail. Realizing something was amiss, Hugh turned to Kiran, noticing his calm and smiling demeanor. It dawned on him that Kiran possessed a love spell, specifically one from a brain-eating goo, which shocked him. His complexion changed dramatically as he stared at Kiran, trying to see through him. But Kiran's origins remained a mystery. Clearly, he wasn't from the Maui tribe. Yet how could he possess such a powerful love spell? Was this person heaven-defying? Are you going to treat her? Kiran, seeing Hugh hesitant, pointed at Lucia and reminded him with a smile. Hugh's expression went through several changes, utterly baffled by Kiran. Dad, cure this woman and let this kid die a terrible death, Xavier Lachlan remarked, oblivious to his father's turmoil. Wanting my daughter is like a toad lusting after swan meat, Matthew Lachlan echoed Bianca's earlier sentiments. Start the treatment, Kiran reminded again, still with a smile. Hugh's confusion deepened, unable to grasp the situation before him. Father, after curing this woman, make sure that boy suffers, Xavier repeated, unaware of his father's conflicted expression. Desiring my daughter? Truly, a toad dreaming of swan meat, Matthew sneered, repeating the insult. Treat her already, Kiran reminded with a smile. However, Hugh's expression began to change. While the identity of this man, Kiran, was unknown to him, he understood that Kiran was not merely a man of physical strength, but also possessed an unseen power. Master Lachlan can surely cure my mother, Bianca hastily added upon seeing no action from him. If you cannot cure her, just admit it and then bring Ruby Lachlan to me, Kiran said, looking at Hugh, who remained motionless. Kiran, shut up! Lucia, lying on the medical bed, opened her eyes and scolded Kiran angrily. Master Lachlan is trying to heal, and you keep causing trouble. That's despicable. Kiran ignored Lucia, simply looking at Hugh. Can you? Or can you not? Xavier, noticing his father's inaction, realized there was an issue and stared at Kiran, trying to figure out the problem. After hesitating briefly, Hugh stood up, turned to Matthew and said, Let him take Ruby Lachlan. What? Matthew exclaimed in shock. Lucia sat up suddenly. Master Lachlan, what about my illness? I cannot cure it, Hugh responded coldly. What? The cold response from Hugh felt like a bucket of ice water to Lucia. Was she to be tied to diapers for the rest of her life? Not just her, but the patients and onlookers were also shocked. They hadn't expected an illness that even Hugh Lachlan couldn't cure. Kiran was somewhat surprised by Hugh's quick concession, but then turned to him with a smile. Since you've conceded, should you not clarify your family's money-making scheme? Hugh's eyes narrowed coldly. Don't go too far. Too far. Kiran pointed to a patient who had claimed to have been treated by Hugh for decades. He contributes thousands to your family yearly. Over decades, how much money is that? Boy, don't slander us, Xavier scolded from the side. Kiran, with his hands behind his back, didn't bother to argue, just staring at Hugh. The opportunity is yours to seize. Hugh's face went through several changes. He hadn't expected Kiran to be so formidable and his family's practices to be exposed. Thinking of the repercussions if this became public, losing face and potentially having to pay compensation, Hugh reluctantly said, I've already given you Ruby Lachlan. With a slow and authoritative tone, Hugh began to exert pressure. He couldn't lose this game, especially not to give Kiran any more hope. Most importantly, he couldn't embarrass the Lachlan family. What I want is an explanation for the people of Fox, Kiran responded with a smile, his demeanor unyielding. Kiran exuded an unquestionable aura and a strong, domineering aura. He did not back down at all. One of Hugh's men, unable to bear it any longer, burst out angrily. Explain my ass. Aye, crack! The sound of bones breaking interrupted him mid-sentence, his neck snapping to the side, lifeless. Kiran had moved in front of the man, breaking his neck. The room fell silent, and then screams erupted. Murder! Thud. Kiran dropped the body to the floor, looked at Hugh coldly, and asked, Shall we continue? Hugh's face turned an even deeper shade of pale. Chapter 635. Killing in public. Kiran did something shocking. He destroyed the Lachlan family's sign and hurt their people. Now he even killed someone right there. He showed no fear and seemed too powerful. Kiran, how dare you kill someone? Hugh asked loudly but sounded a bit scared. You have 3 more people behind you. Do you want me to try again? Kiran replied with a cold laugh. Hugh quickly moved to grab him, but Kiran just stood there and didn't dodge. Hugh's face turned very pale as he tried to hit Kiran even harder. Dad, kill him, Xavier shouted, hoping his dad would win. Want my daughter? Keep dreaming, Matthew said angrily. Kill this bad man, Lucia Jensen screamed, feeling hopeless. Everyone seemed to want Kiran gone. But suddenly Hugh jumped to the side instead. He quickly retreated, putting a lot of space between him and Kiran, looking very surprised. This shocked everyone watching. Why did Hugh want to kill Kiran but then get scared and move back? Xavier and Matthew looked at their dad as if they couldn't believe what happened. Only Kiran and Hugh really knew why. Hugh had wanted to test Kiran, but he found that Kiran was not afraid of him at all. Also, he could not deal with the love spell in Kiran's body, and he could only retreat to protect himself. I don't like to say things twice, Kiran said calmly. Hugh's face kept changing, looking worried. Dad. Xavier still felt upset. Hugh gestured dismissively at Xavier. Matthew, call out Ruby and hand her over to Kiran. Dad, Matthew shouted, clearly very distressed. Do it immediately, right now, Hugh commanded in a deep voice. Matthew, infuriated, stomped his foot and turned to go find Ruby. Hugh's face turned a shade of dark green as he looked towards Kiran, seeming to ask a silent question. Do you want me to repeat myself? Kiran's tone became colder. Getting Ruby was not his only objective. Kiran, you've just killed someone from our family. If this matter blows up, you'll have to bear the consequences, Hugh stated, aware that Kiran was demanding him to acknowledge that the Lachlan family uses spells to heal and harm others. Acknowledging this would not only smash their family's reputation, but more importantly, it would mean their family could no longer stand in Fox City. It's good to blow this up, I'm looking forward to it. At that moment, a cold and proud woman's voice was heard. Ruth Sutton walked in wearing an OL suit dress, her pretty face lifted, her delicate body straight, and she strode in on high heels with an air of arrogance. Her presence exuded an elegant and proud aura. Who are you? Xavier asked loudly. Ruth Sutton. Ruth's gaze landed on Hugh's face. Kiran is a guest of our Sutton family. If you want to make a big deal out of this, then let's blow it up. Hugh's eyes slightly narrowed, totally not expecting Ruth to appear, and even less so to find out how important Kiran was in the eyes of the Sutton family members. Gordon Sutton is the mayor. If he supports Kiran, even if this matter blows up, it could be smoothed over. Moreover, the fault lies with the Lachlan family. Weighing the pros and cons, Hugh's angry expression faded, replaced by a friendly one, and he laughed. Miss Sutton, it's nice to meet you. Then he turned to Kiran. Mr. York, so you are a guest of the Sutton family. If we had known earlier, wouldn't all this misunderstanding have been avoided? He looked back at his family. Go inside immediately and prepare to welcome Mr. York and Miss Sutton inside for a sit-down. The people from the Lachlan family didn't understand, but immediately nodded and turned back to prepare. Mr. York, Miss Sutton, please come inside. Hugh invited them in very respectfully, as if the conflict that just occurred had completely dissipated. Ruth, unaware of what had just happened, looked at Kiran, seeking his opinion. Kiran's lips curled slightly, understanding the other party's intentions, and he coldly asked, Hugh, are you still planning to play dumb? Caught off guard, Hugh's face became somewhat unnatural. But he quickly adjusted. Mr. York, shall we go inside to discuss? No. Kiran raised his hand and pointed around at the sight. If the Lachlan family doesn't clarify this matter, don't blame me for not being merciful. Hugh's face turned extremely ugly. He hadn't expected that. Even after showing such politeness to Kiran, the latter would still stand firm, practically courting death. Mr. York, do you really think this is necessary? Slap. Suddenly, Kiran stepped forward and slapped Hugh across the face, asking, Does it hurt? You. Hugh was shocked, unable to believe he had just been slapped and hadn't managed to dodge it. Slap. Kiran slapped him again. Does it not hurt? Kiran, you dare to hit my father? Xavier yelled in disbelief. Thud. Kiran moved swiftly to Xavier and kicked him, sending him flying with a powerful blow. Quiet, Xavier screamed in pain. The scene immediately became quiet and tense. Hugh's gaze turned sharp and cold, his expression changing rapidly as he suppressed his rage. Getting slapped twice makes you feel unbearable. Kiran scoffed, pointing at the patients and doctors on site. Among these people, how many have been indirectly working for the Lachlan family for years? You've been earning money that goes against your conscience. Don't you feel guilty? Thud. In his anger, Kiran stomped so hard that the bricks under his feet shattered. Hugh, where is the compassion that a doctor should have? Hugh shivered all over as if suddenly awakened. He hadn't expected Kiran to be so powerfully angry. The people at the scene, who had been hesitant to speak out against the Lachlan family for fear of offending them, were now stirred by Kiran's emotions. Especially those who weren't wealthy and had given thousands of dollars to the Lachlan family every year. Give us an explanation. Finally, someone took the lead and shouted out. Is it true that you use spells to heal and to harm others? Another angrily inquired. Is it? Shouts started echoing around the place. Hugh's face turned an even darker shade of green, his cheeks swollen and hotter than if he had been slapped. He had worked hard for 20 years for the rise of the Lachlan family, finally building something substantial. Kiran's arrival had toppled everything he had built and completely robbed him of any chance. He was angry, unwilling, and frustrated. But at that moment, he was powerless. Kiran! Just then, Ruby Lachlan ran out from inside, tears streaming down her face but with eyes full of excited anticipation. Upon seeing his granddaughter, Hugh seemed to see a glimmer of hope. Chapter 636. Ruby was wearing a long white dress. Compared to the last time they met at the Life and Death Love Bar, she had lost a lot of weight, but she also looked much fairer. Under the morning sun, her white dress and fair skin complemented each other, making her irresistibly charming. Her tall figure and graceful curves, perhaps due to excitement, were trembling continuously. The beauty mark between her eyebrows resembled a blooming rose, adding to her beauty and purity, making her stand out like a lotus untouched by mud. Her beautiful eyes were like two clear springs, looking at Kiran with endless affection and tenderness, as if a single glance could last 1,000 years. Seeing their friend in such a state, Esther and Zara felt happy for her, as if lovers were finally getting together. Ruth Sutton's expression dimmed slightly, admitting to herself that the school beauty indeed outshone the class beauty and she could never match Ruby's beauty. Bianca was the most shocked. She had not expected Ruby to be so beautiful, nor did she expect Ruby to show such deep affection for Kiran. "Kiran, I'm giving you my granddaughter," Hugh whispered in a voice only the two of them could hear. Kiran understood that Hugh was not willing to apologize to the patients and was trying to tempt him with this offer. He found it laughable and despised Hugh for being willing to sacrifice his granddaughter in such a manner. "If you don't want the Lachlan family to have even more funerals today, then feel free not to admit anything," Kiran said, his gaze already on the three men behind Hugh. They felt like prey locked by a snake, instinctively looking at the corpse of their companion and retreating, clearly afraid of dying. Hugh was taken aback, not expecting that even Ruby's affection for Kiran would be ignored. He couldn't accept it and turned to Ruby. "Ruby, did you give Kiran your life and death love wine?" Ruby's face flushed red to her neck, stealing a glance at Kiran before nodding slightly. "Yes, grandfather." Hugh laughed heartily. "According to the customs of our Maui tribe, drinking a woman's life and death love wine means marrying her. Now Mr. York is our Lachlan family's son-in-law." He was unwilling to let go, intending to directly rope Kiran in. As for the angry patients, as long as Kiran didn't dwell on the Lachlan family's actions, they could be ignored. Ruby's face, which was filled with despair, now showed a hint of joy. Her grandfather had agreed, even referring to Kiran as a son-in-law, looking at Kiran with anticipation for his acceptance. "Hugh, we are not on the same path," Kiran coldly refused, pointing at the patients. "If things are not clarified, don't blame me." "Kiran, are you really so stubborn?" Hugh was frustrated by Kiran's persistence. "A doctor's heart." Kiran looked around, towards patients. "I only have this one principle." Hugh was left speechless and fuming, but too embarrassed to retort. "If you want my daughter, don't be ungrateful," Matthew couldn't help but angrily threaten. "You misunderstand." Kiran looked at Matthew. "I came here for Ruby because of a pot of life and death love wine, to give her freedom, not to take your daughter." You don't want my daughter." Matthew was shocked, unable to believe that Kiran could refuse his beautiful daughter, a dream for many. Ruby's face was once again covered in despair, her eyes filled with complex feelings of loss and resentment. Everyone was stunned, not expecting Kiran to reject the beautiful and enchanting Ruby. "Hugh, I don't have time to waste." Kiran was getting impatient. Hugh, looking at the corpses of his men on the ground and feeling the burning pain on his cheeks, couldn't help but say begrudgingly, "Kiran, you're tough." Kiran just smiled, seemingly accepting the compliment. Hugh took a deep breath, turned to the patients present, and after taking 3 breaths, apologized. "Sorry, everyone. Our Lachlan family has indeed engaged in using spells for healing and for harming." A buzz went through the crowd. Although they had already guessed it, they were still shocked to hear the admission, causing a stir of disbelief. "Why would you do such a thing?" An elderly man who claimed to have been treated there for decades asked as if he was on the verge of a mental breakdown. Hugh remained silent. The elderly man's emotions spiraled out of control. "Do you know? To get treatment, my family sold our house. We didn't even have money for my mother's burial, and her ashes were just scattered. My wife worked overtime to earn money for my medicine and died from overwork." Showing his callous, dark hands, he continued, "I pick up trash every day. The money I make in a month goes to your medical fees. I barely have 100 yuan left for food, barely surviving, and you are profiting from blood money." Unable to continue, the man broke down crying, sitting on the ground in despair. The crowd was moved to tears, especially those patients who felt a deep connection to his story, also breaking down in tears. Hugh stood still, feeling as though he was being physically and verbally assaulted, his face burning with shame and a desire to hide. Ruby, already pale, turned even paler, realizing her family's wealth was amassed through such means, feeling utterly ashamed. "Grandpa, is it true?" Ruby stammered, her questions stabbing into Hugh's heart as well as tormenting herself. The Lachlan family's reputation collapsed. Hugh's image was ruined. Yet there was no sympathy, only anger and hatred towards such a person who didn't deserve any. "Do you need me to call the police?" Ruth suppressed her rage and asked Kiran. Kiran, silent, fixed his gaze on Hugh. Hugh suddenly seemed much older, his once vibrant and imposing demeanor reduced to that of a decrepit old man. "No need to call the police," Kiran said, then looked towards the Lachlan family's compound. "If within 3 days your family cannot produce a solution that satisfies me." Kiran looked around at the members of the Lachlan family. "You will all die!" The threat hung in the air like a thunderclap, instilling fear and hatred in everyone. Ruby didn't hate him, but she felt utter despair. The life and death love wine, rather than drawing them together, spelled the end of any connection. The Lachlan family, having fed on the misery of others, was universally detested. Kiran, ignoring the Lachlan family's reaction, turned to the patients. "I will treat all your illnesses." Chapter 637. To everyone's surprise and awe, Kiran started treating the people for free. Watching his miraculous way of administering acupuncture and healing, and seeing the shamelessness of the Lachlan family, many people did not hold back from cursing Hugh Lachlan and spitting in disdain as they left. Yet their deep-seated hatred could not be easily dispelled. Faced with such humiliation, Hugh was seething with rage but dared not leave, forced to stand there and endure the humiliation. He became like a statue, his thoughts unknown to others, but the flames of anger in his eyes were unmistakable. Ruby was squatting on the ground, her hands covering her face, sobbing as though her heart was being torn apart. If she had known this would be the outcome, she would have preferred not to have met Kiran at all. The feelings of regret, self-blame, and sadness overwhelmed her. Esther Ellen and Xavier didn't know how to react. They had wanted to help Ruby but ended up causing more trouble for her and the Lachlan family. Yet they also despised the Lachlan family's shamelessness. Ruth Sutton, on the other hand, called people over to assist Kiran, making the Lachlan family, once renowned for their healing hands in Fox City, into just a backdrop for Kiran's display of genuine medical compassion. Kiran's fame spread quickly throughout Fox City, not by his choice but as a result of the unstoppable spread of news in the digital age, attracting even more patients seeking his help. "Kiran, can you treat Aunt Lucia?" Archie Campbell approached quietly, regretting and doubting if Kiran would help, especially after considering his own family's actions towards Kiran. Kiran knew Archie was a kind man and didn't want him to spend his life caring for a woman suffering from urinary incontinence. With a smile, he reassured, "Don't worry, Uncle Campbell." Archie was visibly moved when Kiran called him Uncle Campbell again, shaking his head and tearing up. Lucia, supported by her daughter Bianca, approached with an air of arrogance, not even looking Kiran in the eye. Bianca, internally upset by Kiran's undeniable competence, found solace in the thought of her online prince, Lord of the Sea. She convinced herself that Kiran couldn't compare to her virtual hero. "Uncle Campbell just support her well," Kiran said, no longer addressing Lucia as Aunt Lucia and ignoring Bianca. The ties had been cut. Archie nodded in thanks, and together with Bianca they helped Lucia stand straight. Kiran, ready to begin treatment, clarified, "I'll need to place my hands on your back. It's part of the treatment, not inappropriate." Lucia nodded, her previous accusations against Kiran making her feel as though she had been slapped, holding back her anger. "We understand," Archie quickly said. Bianca glared coldly at Kiran, still filled with hatred and disgust. Kiran placed his hands on Lucia's spine, channeling his internal energy to correct the dislocation. At that moment, as a doctor, he was focused solely on the patient, devoid of any thoughts of revenge. For Kiran, this was his final act of assistance for Archie, a gesture towards a man known for his deep sense of loyalty and emotion. After about 15 minutes, Kiran removed his hands, announcing, "It's done." "Thank you, Kiran." Archie expressed his happiness, urging Lucia, "Quick, thank Kiran." Feeling control over her bladder returning but unwilling to thank Kiran, Lucia retorted, "It's too early to tell if it's really better. We need to observe." Kiran, understanding her reluctance to admit the improvement, chose not to argue. "Uncle Campbell, you should head back. Take good care of your business and health." With those words, Kiran indicated a finality to their relationship. Archie's emotions fluctuated greatly, saddened by the situation. In the end, he embraced Kiran tightly. "Good kid, it's my family that let you down." Kiran simply smiled in response, understanding the unpredictable nature of people's hearts. Archie was one of the decent ones. Lucia and Bianca could only scoff in response. Lucia, dissatisfied with Kiran's treatment and angered by Archie's display of affection, glared fiercely. "Let's go!" As Archie released Kiran and prepared to leave, Bianca couldn't help but say, "Kiran, even if you're impressive, you're not better than my white knight, Lord of the Sea." Hearing Lord of the Sea, Lucia found her confidence, declaring, "That's my son-in-law." "Hello, everyone. I'm live streaming Lord of the Sea's process of healing people, Starly White announced, having set up her live streaming equipment without anyone noticing. Lord of the Sea's process of healing people? Bianca was stunned, thinking she had misheard. Mom. What did she say? Both Lucia and Bianca were shocked, looking at Starly. Who is Lord of the Sea? Starly, having overheard their conversation, deliberately chose to provoke them. Of course, it's brother Kiran. Greeting Kiran with a wave. Hello, Lord of the Sea. Hello, brother Kiran. Ha. Her laughter was filled with joy and sweetness, as if seeing her beloved. For Lucia and Bianca, this revelation was a stab to the heart, a profound shock. They turned to Kiran with questioning eyes, desperately seeking an answer, refusing to believe it. Kiran, ignoring their reactions, knew that after the storm passed, peace would return. The bond was broken, and the fate was sealed. The more Kiran remained detached, the more Bianca was shocked, provoked, and driven to madness. Especially realizing she had been using the fictional Lord of the Sea to mock Kiran, trying to elevate herself, only to expose her most disgraceful side inadvertently. Shaking her head fiercely, denying the truth, yet the clarity remained. Finally, facing Kiran, she shouted, "You're not Lord of the Sea." Who else but Lord of the Sea could challenge the Lions Club, slap the Lachlan family, invest billions in Mysticor Enterprise, and offer 10 billion without batting an eye? Yvonne Quinn's calm voice rose, facts speaking louder than arguments. Awakened by the cold splash of reality, Bianca was sobered, heartbroken, and filled with regret. Looking at Kiran, she realized she had underestimated him from the start, and now it seemed he had always been the victor. Why? Why is this happening? Bianca murmured, still in disbelief. Because I am a member of the York family, Kiran finally looked up and replied. Chapter. With simple words and a straightforward explanation, Kiran provided a deeply impactful answer. He was a member of the York family. This term, once looked down upon by Bianca and Lucia, now stood tall and imposing, rendering them insignificant in comparison. Their so-called superiority meant nothing in front of Kiran's indifference to billions, showcasing the true might and generosity of a great family. Archie Campbell, amidst laughter and tears, looked up to the sky and cried, "Brother York, the York family has someone to carry on its legacy. You can rest in peace." His mixed emotions of joy and sorrow were indistinguishable as he staggered away, a testament to his deep respect for the York family. Kiran watched Archie's retreating figure with complex feelings, touched by his genuine affection for the York family. Yet he knew that human relations were beyond any one person's control and wished Archie a good future. They might not be friends, but they wouldn't be enemies either. No! Impossible, Bianca screamed, her voice breaking as she turned and ran. Her tears flew as she ran, her despair palpable. For the first time, Lucia's face showed complexity and self-reproach, as if she had lost billions. Indeed, Kiran's strength and wealth represented a missed opportunity for them. Unfortunately, Kiran had nothing to do with their family anymore. Thinking of all the things she had lost, she didn't reflect on her mistakes. Instead, she vented her anger on Kiran. "Kiran, you lied to us." She had forgotten all about the premium wild ginseng, the special tea, the 100 billion from the Silver Lions Club, and all the times Kiran had saved their faces and helped cure her incontinence. As the three of them left, silence fell over the scene. Kiran's healing work was done. His gaze shifted to Hugh Lachlan, the main subject of the day, covered in spit. Hugh, trying to suppress his sorrow and anger, looked back at Kiran. Despite the lack of visible rage, his indignation was evident. "Kneel and apologize first." Kiran pointed to the ground in front of the patients. Hugh's face changed drastically, not expecting Kiran to come back to him. "Isn't that 3 days later?" "This is for the interest," Kiran retorted coldly. Ruby stepped forward, pleading, "Kiran, for my sake, don't make my grandfather kneel." "I'll do it instead." Kiran pointed to the patients. "Can you bear their pain? Can you rebuild their broken homes? Can you bring back the dead?" His 3 questions hit Ruby hard like 3 heavy punches. The patients, moved by his words, cried, "Well said! If you wish to kneel, then let all of the Lachlan family kneel and apologize." Kiran surveyed the members of the Lachlan family with a stern gaze. "Ah." Sounds of astonishment came from the Lachlan family members. Ruby looked up at Kiran, her eyes filled with incredulous surprise. She hadn't expected Kiran to have no affection for her, leaving her feeling hopeless and sorrowful. Hugh Lachlan's expression shifted several times before he finally looked at Kiran and said, "I will kneel." "The whole family kneel," Kiran reminded Hugh and the other family members, thinking it only fair given the family's legacy of wrongdoing. "You." Hugh began to retort, anger rising, but he swallowed his words, recognizing the cold, murderous intent in Kiran's demeanor. I'm in despair, Ruby said, looking up at Kiran with a hopeless smile. Kiran remained silent. Without hope from the start, where could despair come from? In Kiran's heart, there was only justice. Wiping away her tears, Ruby looked at Hugh and declared, "Grandfather, I agree to marry." Hugh, hearing this, couldn't help but reveal a flash of joy on his face. "Kneel and apologize." Hugh led by example and knelt before the patients. Thud, thud. One by one, the Lachlan family members followed suit and knelt. Though there were no words of apology, their action of kneeling was an apology in itself, exceeding everyone's expectations and providing a sense of relief to the patients. "Mother, you can rest in peace now. My wife, even if I die, I can do so with open eyes," cried an old man who had been deceived for decades. His loud cries echoed through the crowd, stirring many to tears, finally releasing years of suppressed emotions. As Kiran stood up to leave, Ruby watched his departing figure, her eyes filled with resentful hatred. The life and death love wine had not led to love but left only lingering resentment. Seeing Yvonne following Kiran, Ruby mistook her for Kiran's wife, her jealousy turning into envy and hatred. "Kiran, I have my engagement party tomorrow night at the Seasons Hotel. You're welcome to attend." Ruby stood up and called out through her tears. Since ties were severed, everything became part of the past. Kiran continued walking without pausing. His reaction further agitated Ruby. Was she not worthy of Kiran's admiration at all? Hugh led his family back inside, his face shifting from sorrow to joy. He looked around. "Today, our family might have lost face, but we have seen hope. Our family's unity is one hope," Hugh said proudly, his gaze then shifting to Ruby. "Your marriage to young Master Quinn of Dragon City is the second hope of the family." Ruby's expression turned complicated as she nodded in understanding. Hugh then addressed everyone. "This Kiran, this so-called member of the York family from Bayville, is actually from a branch that was wiped out 20 years ago. Now he might seem glorious, but in reality he's in a precarious position. We will watch and wait for his downfall." The Lachlan family, previously disheartened, was now filled with joy and pride. "The Lachlan family will surely prosper," Hugh and others exclaimed, their voices echoing with newfound determination. "Prepare the engagement party for tomorrow and invite all the elites of Fox City," Hugh commanded, his face full of expectation. "Yes," someone immediately responded, setting out to make arrangements. Ruby's eyes flashed with a painful decision. Since Kiran did not love her, she would make him hate her for life. Her love for Kiran had turned into hatred. As Kiran was driving along, a car suddenly blocked his path. Chapter 639. "Someone is looking for you," Yvonne Quinn spoke slowly. "All right." Kiran's eyes were filled with a cold determination. The taxi driver stopped the car and looked at Kiran and Yvonne. "Pay up, we're getting out," Kiran commanded Yvonne as he opened the car door to step out. As Yvonne took care of the fare, the disapproving driver glanced at Kiran's retreating figure and then at the beautiful Yvonne, commenting, "That kind of man is unreliable. Better stay away from him." Yvonne was momentarily stunned then, with a teasing mood, asked, "How is he unreliable?" "A man who doesn't even pay the cab fare, how could he possibly take care of a woman?" the driver said with a disgruntled tone. Yvonne chuckled at the driver but called out loudly, looking at Kiran's back, "He's henpecked." Hearing this, Kiran couldn't help but roll his eyes. Henpecked? Thinking of Ruby and how both were willing to give their lives for each other with no regrets. Yvonne's playful jibe left him feeling helpless. Without a response, Yvonne exited the taxi and followed Kiran. The driver shook his head, muttering about infatuated women, and drove off. Yvonne felt a twinge of pain in her heart. She was indeed infatuated. The person from the car in front turned out to be Joe Queen, though his expression was somewhat conflicted, even complicated. Kiran hadn't expected Joe Queen to be the one seeking him out, and, seeing Joe's constantly shifting eyes, teased, "Planning something sneaky?" Hearing this, Joe felt a chill run down his spine and shook his head vigorously. "Master York is joking. I wouldn't dare." "What do you want?" Kiran looked toward the taxi, jokingly adding, "I don't even have money for the cab fare." Joe nearly collapsed upon hearing this, remembering he had already given Kiran 400 billion. With that kind of money, Kiran could block the roads of Fox City with luxury cars, a much grander display than 50 Bentleys lined up. "Let's hear it," Kiran said, dropping the jest. "Master Max Yates has finished his retreat and wants to duel with you?" Joe said in a low voice. "Finished his retreat?" Kiran sneered. "Isn't he afraid of dying?" Joe glanced around cautiously and whispered, "Imperial Dragon's overseer, Cliff Locker, has arrived. He's pushing Master Yates to challenge you, to test my martial strength with him," Kiran asked pointedly. Again, Joe was astounded by Kiran's quick understanding and nodded. "Yes." "Now?" Kiran inquired. There's no specific notice yet. I came here secretly to tell you. Joe looked hopeful. He was trying to secure a backup plan by getting on Kiran's good side, knowing his past offenses might not sit well with Kiran. He didn't favor the current state of the Lions Club and thus wanted to ensure he had a fallback position. If Kiran died, Joe wouldn't lose anything, but if Kiran won, he might just save his own life. I understand. You can go, Kiran said, dismissing Joe casually. Be careful, Master York. Joe Queen pondered momentarily before adding, Max Yates is strong, stronger than Faber Luther. Kiran merely smiled slightly, choosing not to elaborate further. Master York, please go ahead with your tasks. Seeing Kiran's indifference, Joe Queen admired him even more and turned to leave in his car. Yvonne approached. What's up? Somebody wants me dead, Kiran remarked casually, as if discussing the weather. So someone wants to die then? Yvonne quipped back with a cold laugh. It's nothing. What are your plans? Kiran asked, turning to Yvonne. Join you in bed and make a baby? Yvonne teased with a twinkle in her eye. Kiran gave her a look. Boring. How can true love's declaration be boring? Yvonne protested, half joking, half serious. I'm off to the Lions Club. Take care of your own affairs, Kiran announced his departure. What about the Lachlan family? Yvonne quickly turned serious again. That's your Maui's business. I think they're hiding their true power, Yvonne shared her suspicion. Kiran was surprised. He hadn't expected Yvonne to notice. The Lachlan family's performance today did not seem representative of a significant family's strength, especially considering their development over 20-plus years and, most importantly, their use of Giyu poison. Hugh Lachlan's behavior was clearly avoiding the Giyu poison issue, indicating they were deliberately holding back. Let them make their move. My focus is on the Lions Club. You handle the Giyu poison matter, Kiran calmly decided. If you don't care about me, be careful. I might die and drag you and Lillian Yans down with me, leaving your wife Snow to widowhood, Yvonne half-jokingly complained to Kiran. Kiran, choosing not to engage further, walked away. Arguing with women was a fool's errand. Yvonne watched Kiran's departing figure, her eyes filled with complex emotions, clearly dissatisfied. A quarter-hour later, Kiran arrived at the Lions Club. Without its two stone lions, the club seemed like a tiger without its fangs, significantly less imposing. His arrival was already noticed. After all, Kiran's aura had spread out. Sitting in the lounge drinking tea, Cliff Locker turned to Max Yates. Master Yates, we have a visitor. Max Yates, taller and more imposing than Faber Luther, dressed in black with shining black hair. It was obvious that internal force had stimulated his aura and even made his entire body different. Calmly, he nodded. Inspector Cliff, rest assured, I will handle it. Cliff raised his eyebrows, somewhat displeased with Max's response and feeling disregarded. Max stood up without waiting for a reply. Let's go. He led the way, with Faber and others following. Cliff was left behind, his expression dark and brooding. Max understood that defeating Kiran would make him a hero of the Imperial Dragon, beyond Cliff's reach. If he failed, Kiran wouldn't spare him, and Cliff would have no chance to bother him. He'd be dead by then, so why bother to be respectful to a harbinger of doom? Cliff stood and followed, feeling as if he had been slapped in the face. When Max got outside, his gaze landed on Kiran's face, and he immediately felt a sharp, domineering aura that could swallow mountains and rivers. Max was already 50 years old. When he saw Kiran's aura, he was shocked. He was inferior to Kiran when he was young. However, he was not young now. Let's duel inside the martial arts arena, Max coldly proposed. Chapter 640. A warrior must maintain their dignity. Max Yates' opening statement instantly shocked and awed Charlie Grant, Faber Luther, and even the ordinary members of the Lions Club, filling them with respect for Max. This moment defined him as a true man in their eyes. Suddenly, the Lions Club seemed to have found its backbone, reigniting their passion. Kiran slightly raised his eyebrows, assessing Max and instantly recognizing his fearless demeanor. All right, Kiran responded, walking inside. Max released his fighting intent, aiming to pressure Kiran and make him fear before the battle even began. However, as Kiran passed him, it was as if nothing had happened. Kiran appeared utterly unaffected by Max's presence, calm and composed. Max's expression subtly changed, confirming the rumors of Kiran's strength. He looked at Faber, who shook his head, signaling that Kiran was indeed a formidable force. The chill in Max's eyes deepened, his aura of defiance against life and death growing more intense. He had resolved that he would die trying if he didn't succeed. Kiran entered the courtyard, with Max and the others following. Midway, Kiran encountered Cliff Locker. Cliff's sharp brows furrowed, his gaze piercing as if intending to slice through Kiran, his eyes cold and ruthless, as though intending to freeze Kiran in place. Guessing this was Cliff Locker based on Joe Queen's intel, Kiran ignored him, as if Cliff were a stranger, and continued walking. Cliff, feeling ignored, was infuriated. His entire body erupted with fighting spirit, unleashing a powerful surge of internal energy towards Kiran, as if intending to overwhelm him completely. Those following Kiran found it difficult to even move forward, with the weaker ones retreating, and some unable to withstand the pressure, falling to the ground. In the end, only Max, Faber, and Charlie remained standing, their complexions pale, evidently struggling to withstand Cliff's mighty presence. Cliff, witnessing this, felt a surge of triumph and smugness. He used this to gauge Kiran's strength, and remembering Max's disregard for him earlier, also to warn Max and the others. Now, seeing the fear in Max and the others, Cliff awaited Kiran's reaction, expecting him to also show fear. However, Kiran remained undisturbed, like a small boat floating serenely on the ocean amidst a storm. Despite Cliff's powerful energy, Kiran walked steadily, unaffected. Cliff felt he had been completely ignored, a severe blow to his ego. "Kiran, you deserve to die," he proclaimed loudly. Kiran stopped, turned towards Cliff, and asked, "I deserve to die?" Cliff, enraged, insisted, "You deserve to die, and who deserves to die for destroying my York family?" Kiran countered coldly. "The York family deserved its fate," Cliff concluded, turning to Max. "Kill Kiran today." "Why don't you kill me?" Kiran asked Cliff with a scornful laugh, showing utter disdain. Cliff, his face turning red at the question, felt deeply humiliated. "I despise the little trick of killing others with a borrowed knife," Kiran remarked, then turned to Max and the others. "You're just tools being tested." Max and the others looked uneasy but remained silent. "Kiran, there's no need to sow discord. For them, following orders is natural," Cliff said proudly, flaunting his status as an inspector. "Then why haven't they tried to kill me upon your command?" Kiran asked mockingly. "Do it," Cliff, faced with Kiran's mockery, commanded Max once more. Max's expression turned extremely dark, yet he did not move immediately, only looking at Kiran. "You," Cliff began, infuriated. "Slap!" Kiran struck Cliff with a palm. "They don't care about you." Cliff screamed in pain, his face a picture of disbelief. How did Kiran strike? He hadn't even seen it coming. He wasn't weak. Max and the others were stunned. Kiran was formidable, but Cliff was known for his strength. How had he been struck so easily? The most puzzling thing for them was how Cliff could not defend against Kiran's attack. The poor Cliff was humiliated to the extreme. This situation was unexpected. Could it be that they really disdained him? Kiran stopped talking and was about to leave. "Max Yates!" Cliff Locker shouted angrily. Max Yates also had a strong sense of fear towards Kiran. Kiran's strength had exceeded his expectations. "Inspector Locker, I've already arranged a duel with Kiran at the martial arts arena." Max Yates's voice was still cold. He did not want to submit to Cliff before he died. When Cliff heard this, he was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. After all this time, he was the anxious one. He secretly blamed himself for not listening to him earlier. If he had known, he wouldn't have said anything and wouldn't have been slapped. "Embarrassing. Depressing. Why don't you duel with me?" Kiran looked at the depressed Cliff and asked with a faint smile. Max Yates and the others looked over with anticipation in their eyes. Cliff snorted and stopped looking at Kiran. His face was filled with anger, but he didn't dare to accept the challenge. Seeing Cliff's frustration, Kiran mocked him further. "So, you're just a loudmouth with no real power, even less capable than those from the Panthergate and Wolf sect." Cliff, insulted again, boiled with anger but remained helpless. "Kiran, don't be too arrogant," he warned. Thud! Without warning, Kiran delivered another kick to Cliff's abdomen, sending him flying. Cliff landed with a thud, a picture of misery. "You!" Cliff was beyond furious, almost bursting with rage. Kiran sneered and paid him no further mind. Max and the others realized Kiran had disrupted Cliff's internal energy with the first strike, making him vulnerable to the second kick. Poor Cliff ended up utterly humiliated. Kiran turned to Max. "There are still 4 days before the deadline I gave you. Do you want to go on your way today or wait for 4 days? Now, kill Kiran," Cliff, lying on the ground, commanded again in a rage. "This matter is between the Lions Club and me, unrelated to you." Kiran dismissed Cliff's fury with scorn. You. Cliff struggled to articulate his anger. Kiran addressed Max. "Shall we proceed now?" Max didn't understand Kiran's implication, but knew he didn't want to die that day. "The duel is set for 4 days later." Kiran acknowledged with a nod, his smile broadening as he turned to leave, leaving behind a scene of anticipation and dread.